Greetings and salutations to all you people of the Ethernet. This is Philosopher215 here, back yet again with yet another video for you all. And in this video, we will be continuing our investigation into the viability of a distinctified multi-vessel democratic template, as a potentially superior replacement to our current single-vessel democratic template. To this end, in today's video, we will be exploring not only the foreseeable results of splitting from a single-vessel system into a distinctified multi-vessel system, designed to achieve as much political autonomy as possible for as many politically desiring groups as possible, but doing so specifically with an eye to see what political groups might struggle under such conditions, if any, as it does such a political proposal of this nature no good to divide and distinctify from a single vessel state into multiple politically autonomous states, only to watch half or more of those states simply collapse in on themselves for any given internal reason or another. With the goal here, of course, being to get an idea of who is going to do well, who is going to struggle, who needs a few extra restrictions placed upon them for whatever reason, and who just simply isn't going to likely make it no matter what I, you, nor anybody else does for them. So, to begin with, let us return back to our single-vessel political template and overlay it with the famous political spectrum bell curve of politically desiring humanity as seen here. Then let us do precisely what Distinctified Multi-Vessel Theory suggests, and go from the entirety of the politically desiring spectrum of humanity, confined to a single ship of state, and simply insist that it manifest itself instead as multiple politically distinct vessels, to achieve multiple political destination viability for a multiple political destination desiring humanity, as laid out in detail in the first video of this series. Perfect. Now let us go through each politically distinctified state in turn, and see if there are any major issues with their independent internal functionality via this proposal thus far. Now before we begin, I would just like to point out that the following observations still hold it to be the case, that there will be a rather extensive list of restrictions and requirements that each of these politically distinctified and autonomous states must do and must not do, such as adhere to the nation's Central Civic Rights Charter, not fall into economic ruin, maintain themselves as a democracy with at least a 51% majority voting system, maintain term limits for governing officials, run proper elections on time, maintain freedom of information and ease of exposure to freedom of information with no judicial or systematic consequence for engaging in freedom of information, educational requirements, economic requirements, judicial requirements, and so forth and so on, with the repeated failure to do so or to self-correct in a timely manner resulting in the temporary return of the distinctified and previously politically autonomous state in question back to the control of the federal government by force of arms if necessary, to be reset back to its original, hopefully properly functioning factory standard conditions, before being re-released back out into the wild, also in a timely manner, to have another go at it. Or something like that. Honestly, I am still working my way rather slowly through how all of that might actually work out best, and in proper functioning order, and have been doing so for quite some time now, which will most definitely be the subject matter for the next video that I make in this series. As for a quick general progress report on the matter, I have a lot of it typed out with a few good and unique ideas in there, and in general am not finding any seriously insurmountable roadblocks to Distinctified Multi-Vessel Theory working out thus far. The issue, however, as you might imagine, is that while it is always easy to find a solution to any given concern, it is often difficult to find a good solution, let alone the best solution, let alone to weave together an entire system of solution functionality of any real quality to any given concern in totality. So, as you might guess, such a video may take me some time yet still, say 6 months to a year or so. However, what I must profess before we continue is that even in my most agonizing moments of going, how do I make this work, and how do I make this work well, that the one observation that seems to trump all other observations in this concern is that even a poorly constructed distinctified multi-vessel template system, where it's just 110,000% amateur hour and somehow we screw up royally in its initial manifestation, is the simple fact that even a poorly designed distinctified multi-vessel system is likely to be a vastly superior system to any well-functioning single-vessel system, and it will most likely definitely have far greater potential than any other political system yet known to man, given any real amount of time to work out any failings that said system might initially possess. Which is ultimately the good news, but for now let us continue with this video's original inquiry. Thus we can see here we now have our single political vessel split into 6 distinctified vessels respectively, and will now be looking at the viable functionality of each in turn as potentially independent states within states. Now, to be honest, I was expecting a bit more of a fight in order to make the far and radical right's ideal political state actually work. But what I got instead, and feel free to correct me if you think that I am wrong, is a group of politically desiring humanity ranging from puritanical extremists to religious extremists to racial supremacists to all manner of prideists, who are all nonetheless shockingly functional both economically and politically, assuming still, of course, and I cannot emphasize this enough here, that they are not allowed to become a dictatorship, must maintain themselves at least a 51% majority rule well-functioning democracy, are not allowed to tyrannize or violate sovereign innate basic human rights, engage in brainwashing, drugging, genetic engineering, denial of freedom of information, particularly to the youth, and under no circumstances should such states be allowed to have any significant military power of any kind outside of basic small arms for home and civic defense. Yet with all of these such checks upon such a state of the willing out of the way, I cannot honestly say that I can see how such a state could fail to function and function well, both economically, politically, and in their own way and to their own extent moralistically. It all rather seems to check out and be rather viable to me. Not necessarily my cup of tea, mind you, but still to each their own. Now, in retrospect of writing this, I must admit that such an outcome need not have been so surprising to me. After all, while one could argue that the further one goes towards the political extremes of humanity, that the more out of touch with reality each political group objectively is, yet while there is definitely quite a bit of truth in that to be sure, I personally often find that said politically desiring groups' political needs, aka their political requests, to be not that out of touch with achievable moralistic reality. In other words, while such politically desiring groups' logic and reasoning might be a bit off, to say the very least, particularly for the tastes of most people, their political request is nonetheless quite reasonable. After all, why shouldn't those who want to live in an insert race, culture, and/or religious group here, society, that champions said values at the state level, be allowed to do so if they so desire it to be the case of their own free will? Well, the answer to that historically has always been because said politically desiring groups have always professed the need to make everyone in the state agree with this, often by force if necessary in order to make such a desired political state a reality. i.e., 10% or more of a given population are professing the need to oppress the political will of the other 90% of the population, to various degrees, in order to make their desired political state manifest, which is most definitely a political request well and truly out of touch with achievable moralistic reality. However, as we saw in the first video of this series, such a proposed political methodology likely stems solely from the need to overcome the issue of all known political groups being trapped within the confines of a single-vessel political template, which Distinctified Multi-Vessel Theory is designed specifically to overcome, precisely by eliminating the need to tyrannize anyone, yet achieving still the same desired political results. As such, it literally all but laughs at this problem, resolves it, and with the sudden acceptable removal of this obstacle, plus a few extra checks and restrictions placed upon them, it would appear to me that the far and radical right's various desired political states can be expected to perform just fine on their own, politically, economically, and in their own way and to their own agreed standards, moralistically. Which is one politically desiring group down, So what then about the others? Well, surprisingly, all of the other politically distinctified states, with the exception of the far and radical left, for reasons that we will be getting into shortly, find themselves in the exact same state of affairs as the far and radical right, just with the added benefit of not being so out of touch with objectivist, moralistic reality, and an awfully lot less potentially tyrannical, and far, far more trustworthy with military and martial capabilities. Thus it stands to reason that given the exact same requirements and limitations as the far and radical right, I can find no foreseeable reason why the states shown here should not likewise, and to an even greater degree, be expected to thrive in their own way and to their own extent within the confines of a distinctified multi-vessel template. Again, likely due to the fact that such politically desiring groups' political requests are not that out of touch with achievable moralistic reality. But then we come to the far and radical left's desired political state, and the phrase out of touch with reality hardly does such demands justice from a political designer's perspective. For example, even if I had the powers of a god and could simply snap my fingers and make such a state's financial and economic concerns magically disappear, as well as alter the very nature of humanity into the form that they wish it would be, even if I could somehow do all of that, I would still only be halfway to achieving said political group's desired political state. Now, admittedly, while it is the job of a political philosopher to actually find ways to make the impossible possible, both politically, economically, and structurally, the very nature of these political demands to be achieved somehow magically by the state in spite of the current impossibility of their very nature is just a bit more extreme than most political philosophers such as myself are used to dealing with. However, despite the surface-level reality of these demands, if one looks deeper into the situation concerning exactly what is going on here, then such a political request does in fact become far more obtainable than one might expect within the confines of a distinctified multi-vessel template. For you see, what at first glance appears to be a single politically desiring group known as the Socialists is in reality two or more quite differingly desiring political groups fused into one, both trying to use the same political template to achieve their differing desired ends. For example, on one side you have a group who cares about other people, who wants to care about other people, and their political request is to live in a state where they can care about and for others, as well as have others care about and for them. Much like one big, happy, functional family, just in the form, size, and function of a state. Fair enough, as that is not an unreasonable nor immoral request, particularly within the confines of a distinctified multi-vessel system. But then we get to the other half of the far and radical left, and discover a group of people who seemingly do not care about others, but want others to care about and for them, and or to simply give them what they want the way that they want it, with said group's political request being something to the effect of them wanting to live in a state where everyone cares about them, looks after them, places their wants, desires, and needs as the highest moral authority of the land, all the while with they themselves not having to give or care about anyone else in return. A political request, again, much like a family, except this time one that simply spoils its children. Now, there are two ways to proof this theory. The first being to casually observe the near constant shifting and often contradictory nature of the goals and desires often expressed by the far left, and to immediately conclude that said political group either passionately and very aggressively does not know what it wants, or that they do know what they want but lack a consensus on what that want is. For me, it is ultimately the passion and aggressiveness that gives it all away, as human beings rarely passionately pursue anything other than the elimination of their confusion, whilst in a state of confusion, with the only exception to this that matches our observed symptoms being watching an individual or group of people passionately pursuing X, only to later change their minds to passionately pursuing Y. But that is not what we see in the far left at all. What we actually see instead is zero alteration of professed desires by any individual or group as a whole within the far left, but instead just contradiction, and the constant theme of give us the political power to make our desired political state a reality, with that contradiction being just what exactly that state is and what its goals ultimately are. All of which are symptoms of a group that differs in its desires, but not so much in the proposed methods being sought after to make said desires manifest, aka multiple differing desiring groups, yet still the same governmental method being sought after. Now, for the second way of proving this theory, all one has to do is simply ask oneself if you believe and can you objectively prove that a portion of humanity fits the description that I have laid out for it, aka self-interested plus the desire to be looked after by others, but not have to look after others in return. Then, if you agree that said people do in fact exist, calculate what percentage of desiring humanity said group actually accounts for, say 5% in this case, and then simply ask yourself where would you expect said desiring group to exist on the political spectrum and why, kind of like a game of political Where's Waldo. And when I do this, the answer surely must be somewhere in the left, because virtually everything on the right champions some form of independence and personal strength, quite the opposite of the desire to be looked after and taken care of, as well as the desire to look after and to take care of others, with a huge likelihood that said self-interested groups in question would manifest here in the far and radical left, aka where we might expect to find those who desire to be cared for hand in hand with those who desire to care for them. Now then, judgments of parasitism, usury, and perpetuated infantilism aside, what all of this creates from a political designer's perspective is an instant chaff and wheat scenario, where if you could simply separate those who want to live in a state where they can care for others and be cared for by others, aka the true socialists, from those who do not desire to care for others, via a boot camp-like requirement to get in specifically designed to weed out the selfish from the selfless, then you end up with two different states for two differently desiring groups, comprising three different kinds of people. On one side you have those who care about others, want to care about others, and be cared about by others, aka the socialists, and on the other side a delightful or abhorrent but possibly strangely functional mix of those who want to be looked after but do not wish to look after others in return, and those who want to look after others but do not care about being looked after in return themselves. So how does the far and radical left's desired political state ultimately rank? Well, as long as a separator of chaff from wheat is in place, then this state, the true socialist state, should do just fine with relatively little issue under a distinctified multi-vessel template. As for the other, its economic health is unlikely, at least until humanity gets machines to do most of its labor for it. As for everything else, we simply do not know and likely cannot know, with my best guess being that it will likely struggle, working as best as it can, any way that it can, likely improving with time and technology, the same historically as any other state. However, in such a state's case, I would suggest insisting on certain requirements in their economic system, as I can foresee them being rather experimental with their economic system, which is likely never going to end in anything other than a disaster. Furthermore, I would likewise suggest substantially more robust child laws than one might have on the far and radical right, as certain elements of humanity are no doubt concentrated here who have a vested interest in denying freedom of development to their children, as much so and arguably in far more detrimental ways than even the far and radical right do. But with all of that in place, the desired political state of the far and radical left does not seem entirely unmanageable, with the simple truth being that certain elements of such a state's true political autonomy will likely have to be denied them for at least some time, such as insisting that their economic system will be a meritocratic capitalistic system, ultimately paired with a flat tax rate that cannot exceed 30% by any means, but with the ability to try something new by constitutional contractual right every 30 years or so, aka about twice a generation, just to let them all know for a fact that the failure to find a superior or even a functioning system that works for them is ultimately on them, and that it is not the system by design that is holding them back. Not that I am expecting such a politically minded group to see it that way. It is just my goal as a political designer to at least provide everyone the opportunity to succeed or to fail, before demanding that Big Brother federal government swoop in to force said state to simply stop failing. But that is a tale for another video in this series. For now, the conclusion. What can we learn from all of this? Well, what all of this shows me, at least, is that the exceedingly vast majority of politically desiring humanity, a solid 90% or more, can be expected to be able to manifest their desired political state successfully and stably in relative political autonomy within the confines of a distinctified multi-vessel template, with the remaining 10% or so of politically desiring humanity likely to achieve a similar level of stability given time and foreseeable technological advances. Thus, in effect, what we are looking at is a political system that potentially best achieves the political desires of between 90 to 95% of humanity to a degree previously unheard of. Thus, in my book, this gives this aspect for Distinctified Multi-Vessel Theory, aka how well can we expect each desiring political group to function as a politically autonomous state within a state, ultimately a solid pass. And with that, the only thing that remains to be seen is just how well can the bonds of oversight and management from the federal government in concerns with maintaining the state of affairs be made manifest, particularly with an eye for granting each politically distinctified state as much political autonomy, aka freedom, as possible. But that shall have to be another video for another time. As always, this has been Philosopher215, hoping for you all the very best.